The train whistle screamed across the dusty platform of Cedar Falls, Kansas. It was 1883, a scorching summer day. Black smoke choked the sky as the iron beast pulled away, leaving behind nothing but the ghost of grinding wheels and the hot smell of coal. On that platform stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. In her small hands, she clutched a faded photograph. Her name was Lucy Rose, but nobody in this town knew that. Not yet. Her dress was a patchwork of hard times, too big for her tiny frame. The hem dragged in the Kansas dust. Her shoes were so thin, her toes peeked right through the cracked leather. Blonde hair, tangled and dirty, hung past her shoulders. But her eyes, her green eyes burned with a fire that didn't belong on such a young face. Lucy pressed the photograph to her chest. She whispered to the empty air, "Mama, Papa, I found the place, just like you told me. Where are you?" Her voice was small, but she stood tall, staring down the tracks as if they might just walk right out of the shimmering heat and scoop her up. The photograph showed a man and a woman smiling. The man had kind eyes, a thick mustache. The woman wore a simple dress, flowers in her hair. They looked happy. They looked loved. It was all Lucy had left of them. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the wanted poster flapping on the bulletin board just behind her. The wind had torn a corner loose, and it danced like a ghost trying to tell a secret. The faces on that poster were a perfect match for the photograph in her hands. And below their smiling pictures, in bold black letters, were the words that would have shattered her world. Wanted, dead or alive. Bank robbery, reward $500. And at the very bottom, in smaller print, a warning. Considered armed and extremely dangerous. But Lucy couldn't read those words. And even if she could have, she wouldn't have believed them. Not for a second. To her, Mama and Papa were the whole world. They sang her songs. They told her stories. They promised they would always, always come back for her. As the sun climbed higher, Lucy started her long walk through Cedar Falls. She showed the photograph to anyone who would look. She saw a shopkeeper sweeping his front steps. "Excuse me, mister. Have you seen my Mama and Papa?" She held up the picture, hope shining in her eyes. The man barely glanced at it. He shook his head. "Sorry, little one. Haven't seen 'em." He went back to his sweeping. She moved on. She tried the lady hanging laundry, the blacksmith at his forge, the old men playing checkers outside the saloon. Each time, it was the same story. A quick look, a shake of the head, and something else. A flicker of fear in their eyes before they turned away. Nobody had time for a lost little girl. Or maybe nobody wanted the trouble that came with her. By evening, her stomach was a knot of pain. The last piece of bread her parents had given her was gone 2 days ago. She was getting weaker. She found a spot behind the church, a stack of hay bales, and curled up between them like a lost kitten. That first night was the hardest she'd ever known. She had never slept anywhere but her own bed, tucked between her parents, listening to their steady breathing. Now, she was alone under a cold blanket of stars. Every sound made her jump. Coyotes howled in the distance. The wind rattled the church windows like skeleton fingers. She hugged the photograph tight, and she whispered her prayers until sleep finally took her. The next morning, she brushed the hay from her dress and started walking again. A new town. New hope. Maybe Mama and Papa were just confused. Maybe they went to the wrong station. There had to be a reason. There just had to be. For weeks, Lucy walked. She crossed the endless Kansas prairie, moving from one dusty town to the next. She learned to sleep in barns and under bridges. She begged for scraps behind restaurants and picked berries from thorny bushes along the road. Her dress got dirtier, her shoes fell apart. But she never stopped showing the photograph. She never stopped asking that one simple question. "Have you seen my Mama and Papa?" Some people were kind. A baker's wife gave her a loaf of bread and let her wash her face. A rancher let her sleep in his barn for 3 nights, and gave her an old blanket that smelled like horses, but felt like heaven. These small kindnesses were the fuel that kept her going. But summer bled into fall. The air grew a colder edge. And Lucy was running out of fuel. Her ribs showed through her thin dress. Her steps grew slower, unsteady. She had walked hundreds of miles. She had shown the photograph to thousands of people. Nobody had seen them. Nobody knew a thing. On a cold October morning, she stumbled into a crossroads town called Redemption Creek. Her vision was blurry from hunger. Her legs felt like water. She managed to show the photograph to a few faces on Main Street, but they swam before her eyes. The last thing she remembered was the taste of dust in her mouth as the world went black. She collapsed right there, in the middle of the street. The precious photograph still clutched in her small, white-knuckled fist. The sound of spurs on wooden boards echoed down the main street of Redemption Creek. A tall man stepped down from his horse. His name was Jake Morrison, and his face was a warning to keep your distance. 3 days of stubble on his jaw, gray eyes that held the cold of a man who had seen too much. At 38, he looked older, worn down by years of drifting with nothing but his horse and his ghosts for company. Jake had come to Redemption Creek for supplies. Nothing more. He planned to be gone before sunset. He didn't like towns. He didn't like the way people stared and whispered. All he wanted was to be left alone with his grief. But as he tied his horse to the hitching post, he heard voices. A small crowd had gathered in the street. Jake tried to ignore it, mind his own business. But then he heard a woman's words that stopped him cold. Poor little thing. Looks half dead from hunger. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to get his supplies and ride out. But he didn't. He found himself pushing through the crowd. And there, on the ground, curled up in the dust like a broken doll, was the tiniest girl he had ever seen. Her blonde hair was matted with dirt. Her clothes were rags, and in her fist she clutched a photograph so tightly her knuckles were bone white. Somebody should take her to Doc Henderson, the blacksmith said. But nobody moved. What if she's got some disease? A woman worried. We can't risk our own children. Sheriff's out of town, another man said. Let him deal with it when he gets back. Jake felt something twist deep in his chest. A feeling he hadn't felt in 5 long years. She couldn't be more than 7. So thin. Something about her. The blonde hair, the small frame. It reminded him of someone he spent every waking moment trying to forget. I'll take her to the doc, Jake heard himself say. The words came out before he could stop them. The crowd turned, staring at him. Jake Morrison, the silent drifter, was getting involved. You sure about that, mister? The blacksmith asked. She ain't your responsibility. Jake didn't answer. He bent down and carefully, gently, scooped the little girl into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her breathing was so shallow he had to put his ear to her mouth just to feel it. Nobody else seems to be stepping up, he said gruffly. Then he walked toward the doctor's office without another word. Doc Henderson was a kind man in his 60s. He took one look at the girl in Jake's arms and cleared a space on his examination table. Malnutrition and exhaustion, the doctor said after a few minutes. When's the last time this child had a proper meal? She's skin and bones. Found her collapsed in the street, Jake explained. Don't know anything else about her. Doc Henderson gently pried the photograph from the girl's fingers. He studied it. These must be her parents. Handsome couple. Wonder where they are. Jake looked at the photograph, and his stomach dropped through the floor. He'd seen those faces before. He knew exactly who they were. He'd seen them on wanted posters in 3 different towns. The man and woman in the picture were notorious bank robbers, and they'd been killed in a shootout with lawmen nearly 2 years ago. This little girl. She'd been searching for ghosts. I'll keep her here till she wakes up, Doc Henderson said, covering her with a blanket. Then we'll have to figure out what to do. Probably send her to the orphanage in Kansas City. The word orphanage hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He stared down at the sleeping child. He saw another little girl, blonde hair, green eyes, his daughter, Emma. She had been just about this age when the Comanche raiders came, when they took her life. His wife, Sarah, had died 6 months later, her heart broken beyond repair. Since then, Jake had been running from anything that reminded him of the family he'd lost. But looking at this child, so small and helpless, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. And in that moment, Jake Morrison made a choice that would change everything. 3 days later, the girl opened her eyes. Jake was sitting in a chair beside her bed. He couldn't say why. He told himself he was just making sure she was all right. But the truth was more complicated. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice small and scared. "You're in the doctor's office, in Redemption Creek," Jake said gently. "You collapsed in the street." She struggled to sit up. Jake helped her, placing a pillow behind her back. Her eyes darted around the room, wide with fear, until they landed on the photograph on the bedside table. She snatched it, clutching it to her chest. "I have to go," she said, trying to swing her legs over the side of the bed. "I have to keep looking for them." "Whoa there, little one," Jake said, gently stopping her. "You're not strong enough yet. What's your name?" "Lucy Rose," she said, then looked at him with suspicion. "Who are you?" "Name's Jake Morrison. I'm the one who brought you here." He studied her serious little face, and his heart broke a little more. "Lucy," he said softly, "who are you looking for?" She held up the photograph with both hands, her eyes shining with a desperate, painful hope. "My mama and papa. They told me to meet them at the train station, but they weren't there. I've been looking for them for a really, really long time." Jake felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. This child had no idea her parents were dead. She had been wandering the prairie for months, maybe longer, searching for people who were never coming home. "How long have you been looking?" he asked, his voice quiet. Lucy scrunched up her face, trying to count. "I think when the leaves were green, and now they're all different colors. A long time." "That's a long time to be on your own," Jake said. "You've been very brave." For the first time since she'd woken up, Lucy smiled. It was a small, shy smile, but it lit up her whole face. "Mama always said I was brave like a lion, even though I'm little." Jake had to look away. That smile. It was so much like Emma's. His daughter used to say things just like that. Wise one moment, innocent the next. Doc Henderson came in. He said Lucy needed at least a week of rest and good food before she was strong enough to travel. The problem was, where would she stay? The town had no place for a lost child. The nearest orphanage was hundreds of miles away. "I suppose she could stay here in my office," Doc Henderson offered. But Jake could see the worry in the old man's eyes. And then Jake heard himself speak the words again. The words that would seal his fate. "I'll take care of her." The doctor raised his eyebrows. "You, Jake? No offense, but you're not exactly the fatherly type." Jake looked at Lucy. She was listening to every word, her eyes wide and worried. "Just until she's strong enough," he said. "Just until we figure out what comes next." But as he said it, a cold dread washed over him. He knew exactly what had to come next. He would have to tell her the truth, and he had no idea how. That evening, Jake helped Lucy walk to the small room he'd rented above the saloon. It wasn't much, just a bed, a chair, and a washstand. But it was clean and warm. Lucy sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching her photograph. "Is this where you live?" she asked. "For now," Jake said. "I don't usually stay in one place very long." Lucy nodded seriously. "Me neither. I've been lots of places looking for Mama and Papa." Jake felt the crushing weight of the secret he was carrying. He knew the truth. But how do you tell a 7-year-old girl that her whole world is a lie? How do you destroy the only thing that's keeping her alive? "Lucy," he said carefully, "what will you do if it takes a long time to find them?" She looked at him with those green eyes, so old and serious. "I'll just keep looking. I promised them I would find them, and I always keep my promises." Jake turned away. He stared out the window at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, under the cold Kansas dirt, were the graves of two outlaws who had loved their daughter enough to hide her before their final gunfight. And here, in this little room, was a child who would search for them forever. For the first time in 5 years, Jake Morrison felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crack. He had sworn he would never care about anyone again, but this brave little girl was making that impossible. He was caught in a trap of his own making. To protect her, he had to lie, but every lie he told only pulled her deeper into a fantasy that would one day have to end. And when it did, he feared it would destroy them both. Winter came early to Kansas that year. Bitter winds howled through Redemption Creek. Snow piled up in drifts against the buildings. Jake had planned to move on after a few days. That's what he always did. But somehow weeks had turned into a month, then 2, and he was still there. Lucy was getting stronger. Regular meals and a warm bed had brought color back to her cheeks. But she hadn't given up her search. Not for a second. Every morning she would ask him, "Can we look for my parents today, Jake?" And every morning he would find an excuse. "It's too cold to travel today. The roads are too muddy. We need to wait for the supply wagon." Lucy would nod and accept his reasons. But Jake could see the disappointment in her eyes. The hope inside her was a fire, and his lies were a poor shield against the heat. As the days passed, something strange started to happen. Jake found himself looking forward to her chatter over breakfast. She told him stories about her dreams. She showed him the pictures she drew with the paper and pencils Doc Henderson had given her. The drawings were always the same: a man, a woman, and a little girl. They stood in front of a house with flowers in the yard. "That's me and Mama and Papa," she'd explain, pointing to the stick figures with huge smiles. "When I find them, we're going to live somewhere with lots of flowers, and maybe a dog. Do you think we could have a dog, Jake?" Jake's chest would tighten. No reunion. No house with flowers. No dog. But he couldn't bring himself to say it. He couldn't crush the light in her eyes. One snowy afternoon, Lucy was helping him organize his saddlebags. She looked up at him, her face serious. "Jake, what happened to your family?" The question hit him like a physical blow. His hands froze on the leather straps. He couldn't breathe. "What makes you think I had a family?" "Sometimes you get a sad look on your face," she said quietly. "Like when I talk about Mama and Papa. And last night, you were talking in your sleep. You said Emma and Sarah. You sounded really sad." Jake sat down heavily on the bed. His walls, so carefully built, were crumbling to dust. He had never spoken their names to another soul. Not in 5 years. But this little girl's innocent question had reached right into his chest and pulled out all the pain he carried. "I had a daughter," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Her name was Emma. She was about your age. Blonde hair and green eyes, just like yours." Lucy climbed onto the bed beside him and waited. "And I had a wife, Sarah. She was the prettiest woman in 3 counties. Made the best apple pie you ever tasted." His voice cracked. "We lived on a small ranch outside Abilene. It wasn't much, but it was home." "What happened to them?" Lucy asked gently. Jake was silent for a long time. "There was a Comanche raid," he finally said, the words rough and painful. "I was in town for supplies. By the time I got home—" He stopped, clearing his throat. "Emma was gone. Sarah, she lasted another 6 months. But the grief, it was too much. She just faded away." Lucy reached over and took his big, calloused hand in her small one. "I'm sorry, Jake. That's really sad." For the first time in 5 years, Jake felt the burn of tears behind his eyes. This little girl, who had lost everything herself, was comforting him. "After that," he continued, "I couldn't stay. Everywhere I looked I saw them. So I started drifting." "Is that why you helped me?" Lucy asked. "Because I remind you of Emma?" Jake looked down at her serious face. He had to be honest. "Maybe at first," he admitted. "But now it's different." "Different how?" He struggled for the words. How could he explain that she had brought light back into his dark world? That her laughter was a sound he thought he'd never hear again? that taking care of her had given him a purpose. "Now I help you, because you're Lucy," he said simply. "And Lucy is special all by herself." She smiled, her bright gap-toothed smile. She leaned against his arm. "You're special too, Jake. Even if you're kind of grumpy sometimes." And despite everything, Jake smiled back. He couldn't remember the last time he had smiled. As winter deepened, their routine became natural. He'd wake up and start the fire. They'd have breakfast at the cafe, where Lucy would show her photograph to anyone new. In the afternoons, Jake taught her things: how to start a fire with one match, which berries were safe to eat, how to read animal tracks in the snow. "Why do I need to know all this?" she asked one day. "Because a person should know how to take care of themselves," he said. "You never know what might happen." But even as he taught her to be independent, he was becoming more attached with every passing day. She had started calling him Papa Jake when she forgot herself. And instead of correcting her, he found that he liked the sound of it. She would fall asleep with her head on his shoulder as he read to her in the evenings. Those were the moments that scared him the most. They felt too much like the life he had lost. He kept telling himself it was temporary, that he would have to tell her the truth. But every day that passed made it harder to imagine his life without her. By spring, the whole town had gotten used to seeing them together. The silent drifter and the lost little girl. People would nod and smile. Mrs. Henderson, the doctor's wife, invited them to Sunday dinner. But with the melting snow came restlessness. Lucy started talking more and more about her search. She'd stand at the window, watching the road that led out of town. "The snow's all gone now, Jake," she said one morning. "Don't you think we could start looking again? Maybe Mama and Papa went south for the winter, like the birds." Jake's coffee tasted like ash. He had known this day was coming. "Maybe we should wait just a little longer," he said weakly. "Make sure the roads are really dry." Lucy's face fell, and Jake saw something new in her eyes. Doubt. For the first time, she was starting to question his excuses. That night, after she was asleep, Jake sat alone at the table. He pulled a crumpled wanted poster from his coat pocket. He'd been carrying it for months. Couldn't throw it away. Couldn't show it to her. The faces of her parents stared back at him. He was living on borrowed time. Sooner or later she would insist on leaving, and he would have to make a choice: keep lying to protect her innocence, or tell her the truth and watch her world burn to the ground. Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, Jake Morrison had fallen in love with this little girl. He had started to hope for a future he had no right to dream about. And now, that love was about to force an impossible choice. Outside, a spring storm was brewing. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but Jake knew the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was coming for him and for Lucy. The warm May morning that changed everything started like any other. Lucy was at the cafe counter, eating pancakes, when she heard Jake talking to Sheriff Coleman at the next table. His voice was low, but she heard every word. "The girl's been with you almost 8 months now, Jake," the sheriff was saying. "People are starting to ask questions. A man your age, no wife, keeping a child that ain't his. It don't look right." Jake's voice was tense. "She's a good kid, not causing any trouble." "I'm not saying she ain't," the sheriff replied. "But maybe it's time to think about what's best for her. There's a nice family in Kansas City, the Mitchells, been looking to adopt a little girl. They could give her things you can't: a proper home, schooling, a mother." Lucy's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "I'll think about it," Jake said finally. Lucy didn't wait to hear another word. She slipped off her stool and ran back to their room, her heart pounding in her ears. He was going to send her away. He was tired of her, just like she always feared. She had been a fool to think anyone would want to keep her. That night, she lay in bed, pretending to be asleep. She heard Jake by the window talking to himself. "She deserves better than this," he whispered to the darkness. "She deserves a real family. Not some broken-down cowboy who can't even tell her the truth about her own parents." Tears filled Lucy's eyes, but she squeezed them shut. When Jake's breathing finally deepened into sleep, She slipped out of bed. She packed her few belongings into a small cloth bag. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't wait for him to send her away. She had survived on her own before. She could do it again. She left while it was still dark, a ghost slipping out of town. The photograph of her parents was clutched in her hand. She walked east, toward the one place on the map in the general store she hadn't checked yet, an old mining camp called Devil's Canyon. Jake woke to an empty bed. The silence in the room was a punch to his gut. He threw on his clothes and ran downstairs, shouting her name. Mrs. Henderson at the cafe said she'd seen a small figure walking east just after sunrise. Jake saddled his horse and rode hard, his heart pounding with fear and guilt. He should have told her. He should have told her months ago. He found her just before noon. She was sitting on a rock beside an abandoned mining shack. Her small shoulders were shaking, and the photograph, it was torn into 100 pieces at her feet. Scattered around her were other things. A man's torn shirt, a woman's broken locket, and a piece of paper that made Jake's blood run cold. It was an official sheriff's report, dated 2 years ago. It described the death of 2 bank robbers in a shootout. Their names were Charles and Mary Rose. Lucy looked up as his horse approached. Her face was streaked with tears. But her green eyes weren't sad. They were blazing with a white-hot anger. "You knew," she said. Her voice was too old, too hurt for a 7-year-old. "You knew they were dead, and you let me keep looking." Jake swung down from his horse. He walked toward her slowly, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. "Lucy, I can explain." "No!" she screamed, jumping to her feet. "You lied to me. For months and months. You let me think they were coming back. You knew they were never coming back." Jake felt his own heart breaking. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could give you a little more time to be happy." "Happy?" Her voice cracked. "You think lying to me made me happy? You think hoping for something that was never going to happen made me happy?" He reached for her, but she recoiled. "Lucy, please. I know I should have told you. But I love you. And I didn't want to see you hurt." "If you really loved me," she said, tears streaming down her face, "you wouldn't send me away to those people in Kansas City." Jake's face went white. "You heard that? I heard you tell the sheriff I deserve better than you," she said, her voice filled with a pain that cut him to the bone. "Well, maybe you're right. Maybe I do deserve someone who won't lie to me." She turned and started walking away, leaving the torn photograph and the broken memories in the dust. Jake stood frozen, watching the little girl who had become his whole world walk out of his life. And he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that this time he might have lost her forever. The truth was finally out, but instead of setting them free, it had destroyed everything. Lucy didn't get far. The anger that had fueled her was burning out, leaving only a hollow exhaustion. Her legs ached. Her throat was dry. When she heard Jake's horse coming up behind her, she didn't have the strength to run anymore. She just kept walking, one foot in front of the other. But Jake didn't ride past. He dismounted. He started walking beside her, leading his horse by the reins. They walked in silence for a long time. The only sounds were their footsteps on the hard-packed dirt and the gentle clop of the horse's hooves. Finally, Lucy couldn't stand it anymore. "Why are you following me?" she asked, not looking at him. "Because I can't let you walk away thinking that I don't want you," Jake said quietly. "That's the furthest thing from the truth." She stopped and turned to face him. Her eyes were still red from crying. "Then why? Why did you tell the sheriff I needed a real family? Why were you going to send me away?" Jake knelt in the dirt, so he was eye level with her. "Because I'm scared, Lucy," he said, his voice raw. "I'm scared that I'm not good enough for you. I'm scared that someday you'll realize you could have had a better life with people who know how to raise a child properly. With a mother." "But I don't want other people," Lucy said, her voice small and trembling. "I want you." Jake's chest tightened. "Even after I lied to you? Even after I kept the truth from you for all those months?" Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "When you didn't tell me, Were you trying to hurt me? No, Jake said immediately. Never. And when you talked about sending me away, were you trying to get rid of me? His voice broke. No, sweetheart. I was trying to make sure you had the best life possible, even if it meant I couldn't be a part of it. She studied his face with those wise old eyes. Jake, can I ask you something else? Anything. When you think about me going to Kansas City, how does it make you feel? He closed his eyes, took a shaky breath. Like someone's tearing my heart out of my chest. And when you think about me staying with you, forever and ever? He opened his eyes and looked right at her. Like I could finally be happy again. But Lucy, happiness isn't the only thing. Jake, she interrupted, stepping closer. Do you remember when you told me about Emma and Sarah? How much you loved them? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Well, she said, I was sad when I thought my mama and papa were just lost. But when I found out they were really gone, I wasn't just sad. I was empty. Like a big empty hole inside me. She reached out and took his rough hand. But then you came, she said softly. And you filled up that hole. Not because you were trying to be them, but because you loved me for who I am. Jake felt the sting of tears again. I have one more question, she said seriously. Did you stay with me all these months because you felt sorry for me? Because I reminded you of Emma? He looked into her earnest face and knew this was the most important answer he would ever give. At first, maybe a little, he said, forcing the hard truth out. But not for a long, long time now. Then why did you stay? Jake took a deep breath and spoke from the very bottom of his broken heart. Because you saved me, Lucy. When I found you in that street, I thought I was helping you. But the truth is, you were helping me. You brought light back into my life when I thought it would be dark forever. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. A reason to come home at night. You didn't just need me, Lucy. I needed you too. He paused, his voice full of wonder. You're not my burden, Lucy Rose. You're not someone I have to take care of out of guilt. You're my blessing. Lucy's eyes filled with happy tears. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Does that mean you want to keep me? She sobbed. Really? Forever? Jake held her tight, feeling the broken pieces inside him finally starting to heal. If you'll have me, sweetheart. If you'll have a grumpy old cowboy who makes mistakes and doesn't always know the right thing to say. I will, she whispered against his dusty shirt. I'll have you, Papa Jake, forever and always. And for the first time since he'd lost his family, Jake Morrison felt like he was home. 3 weeks later, Jake stood nervously in the Dodge City courthouse. He wore his cleanest shirt and a tie Doc Henderson had loaned him. He was clean-shaven, his hair slicked back. Beside him, Lucy sat in a new blue dress with tiny flowers that Mrs. Henderson had sewn just for this day. Her hair was in a neat braid with a yellow ribbon. She held Jake's hand so tightly, her knuckles were white. Judge William Carter was a stern-looking man who seemed to see right through you. He spent an hour asking Jake questions about his past, his plans, his ability to provide for a child. Mr. Morrison, the judge said in a deep voice, you understand that adopting this child is a lifelong responsibility. Can you provide her with a stable home? Yes, sir, Jake said, his voice steady. I've bought a small ranch outside Redemption Creek. It's not fancy, but it's ours. Lucy will have her own room. And her education? The school marm has agreed to teach her. Lucy's real smart, sir. Can already read better than most. Judge Carter looked down at Lucy. And what about you, young lady? Do you want Mr. Morrison to be your legal father? Lucy stood up on her chair so she could see over the tall desk. Yes, sir, I do, she said, her voice clear and strong. Jake's been taking care of me for almost a year. He taught me how to ride a horse and make a campfire. He reads to me every night and makes sure I eat my vegetables. He's already my papa in my heart. The judge's stern expression softened, just a little. And you understand this means giving up the search for your birth parents. Lucy's voice was sure. My mama and papa are in heaven now, I know that. But Jake is here with me, and he loves me. The judge was quiet for a long moment, looking from Jake to Lucy and back again. Finally, he picked up his pen and signed the papers with a flourish. Mr. Morrison, I hereby grant you full legal custody of Lucy Rose Morrison. Congratulations to you both. Lucy squealed with joy and threw her arms around Jake's waist. Did you hear that, Papa? I'm Lucy Rose Morrison now. We have the same last name. Jake picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing through tears. After all the pain, all the uncertainty, they were finally, officially, a family. 6 months later, their small ranch was bustling with life. The house was painted white with blue shutters. Lucy had planted wildflowers in the front yard. She helped Jake with the horses every day, and she rode like she'd been born in a saddle. The people of Redemption Creek had accepted them completely. Lucy had friends at school. On Sundays they'd have dinner with Doc and Mrs. Henderson. And Jake smiled now. It was a sight no one in town had ever thought they'd see. One evening in late autumn, they were sitting on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, a train whistle blew its lonely call. Lucy looked up from her book. Papa, she said, do you think there might be another little kid on that train who's lost and scared like I was? Jake followed her gaze toward the distant tracks. Could be, he said. Why? Well, she said, leaning against him. If there is, maybe we could help them. The way you helped me. Jake smiled and pulled her closer. You know what? I think that's a wonderful idea. We've got plenty of room. Lucy grinned. I used to think family was just the people you were born with, she said. But now I know it's the people who choose to love you. The people who never give up on you. That's right, sweetheart, Jake said, kissing the top of her head. And you know the best part? What? Our family is just getting started. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jake Morrison looked out at the life he and Lucy had built, and he felt a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. He had thought his story was over. But Lucy had shown him that sometimes, the most beautiful chapters come long after you think the book is finished. They were no longer two broken people, searching for what they had lost. They were a family, whole and happy, and ready for whatever came next. If you believe that family is about more than blood, that it's about the love we choose to give, then hit that subscribe button. You never know what other stories of hope you might find.